In opening government, we believe that what AAP must do is that they must join and form a coalition with the Indian National Congress. The context that must be accepted right now is that the party that is in power is the BJP party that is led by Narendra Modi. With that said, we think that there are three goals that are owned by AAP. The first is on fighting the BJP. We need to do whatever we can to make sure that the BJP do not stay in power again. Two, the neat thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that we are able to access more power than what we have right now. And third and finally, we need to begin doing changes and also entering our policy to the mainstream Indian discussion and entering our policy to the mainstream policy making in India. We think that all these three goals will be able to be achieved much better if we have the power that exists behind the INC. With that said, I want to talk about three things. First, I want to talk about why we need to minimize the harms that are currently being wreaked by the BJP and how partnering and making a coalition with the INC is a good way to achieve that. Secondly, I want to explain why in a coalition that we form with the INC, we will be a relevant stakeholder and why this will thus give us the ability to determine how things are shaped to a certain degree in the future. Third and finally, I want to explain about getting into power and what getting into power means for us and why that is the most important thing in this debate. Let's begin with why we need to minimize the threat of the BJP. Let's contextualize what exactly the BJP are doing right now. First, it is oppressing the people in Kashmir, right? They're taking their land, they're killing its people. The people are literally being gunned down on the street. Even the likes of internet access is being shut down just so that the people are unable to speak up. Secondly, the BJP is also standing behind the belief of Hindutva. What is the Hindutva? It is the belief of Hindu superiority that basically means that people who are of non-Hindu beliefs are significantly inferior compared to the people who are Hindu. The manifestation is the likes of the religious bill on how people who are Muslim can lose citizenship in India right now. On its own, these are key policies that are severely against what we stand for as AAP, right? Because what we stand for, what we believe on is the likes of community building. What we believe on is the likes of self-governance. And inherent within those is the belief that everyone have rights and everyone have equal rights that must be respected. That's why BJP is an antithesis to that. And their very existence is harming us, right? So that's why what we need to do is that we need to make sure that they are no longer in power. And we think that one of the best way to do that is to strengthen their biggest challenger, which in this case is the INC. That's why we need to strengthen them to boost their chances of being able to defeat the BJP. Why is it a very big problem if we allow the BJP to stay in power any longer? Because if the BJP stay in power, what they can do is that they can rig the political system so that they can get future power and win elections again and again. How do they do that? Two ways. First is social media. On how what the BJP is doing is now they literally have their own groups of cyber team that make sure that there are WhatsApp groups and there are people who enter social media in form of bots and in form of paid accounts to make sure that fake news and political polarization is increased to a very significant degree. Secondly, what the BJP is doing is also constitutional changes to make sure that gerrymandering can happen and electoral district is redrawn for the purpose of making elections become easier for them and some of the seats that are in demand become safer seats for them. This is why we cannot stand and wait until the BJP lose, because them winning again means more opportunity for them to rig the game for them to win again. That's why we need to throw our lot with the strongest challenger. Secondly, why we will be relevant in that new coalition, right? Look, the first thing that I want to explain is on the numbers. In India, their system works in a bicameral parliament system. The parliament, also known as the Sansad, consists of the Council of States or Rajya Sabha that are filled with 245 seats, and the House of the People, also known as Lok Sabha, filling with 545 seats. The INC currently have 19.3 seats. The AAP, I agree, our number is small, it's only 2.1% of the seats. That is small, but that's fine. Why? Because the BJP only have 31.0%, ladies and gentlemen. That's just a difference of 11% from the INC. That's why our number is still big enough to be relevant. And the chance for them to beat the BJP increase, especially if INC were to make coalition with other parties as well. That's why every party within this grand coalition can be very relevant, because the difference between them and the BJP is that small, and they want to maintain everyone within the coalition, right? But secondly, understand that INC also have an interest to join with us, because we are a party that is rising in popularity. AAP is particularly popular in urban areas, including urban areas that are very popular and very, very pro-Modi, because Modi is helping them big time. It means that we are targeting the demography that INC don't. Sure, we are not the strongest party in doing that targeting, but that's because we don't have the access for funds that the INC have. We think that what is great is if our brand can be combined with the money that is owned by the INC, and then we can just target these urban people. Let me preempt the point that might come from opposition. That is why we cannot rise without them, right? Why the AAP cannot rise without the INC. The reason why we can't do that is because we don't currently have the funds that are owned by the INC. We do not have connections with the likes of the Bajrak Dal. We do not have connections with the Jamiat Ulama Hind. We don't have connections with the Usyah Hindu Pashvid. These are groups that are significant funding source that we don't have connection to, but INC does. That's why partnering with them opens the possibility of connection to this group. Final point, what can we do once we get in power? Why power is the most important thing? First, involvement in policy creation. I agree that the INC is left, but there are key things that AAP desire that can go hand in hand with leftism. Community building, for example, can go with leftism because we can focus on building unions. Big government that the left want can also work with decentralization, because the big government can come from a decentralized way. So we can go hand in hand. But secondly, what we can do is we can propose bills. Okay, we might be the minority of the coalition, but if our policy is reasonable, it can still pass. Furthermore, we can scrutinize the current government. Maybe the INC includes corrupt people, but what we can do if we are part of the coalition is we can find people who are corrupt and people who are not corrupt, and we can be kingmakers when we understand who to back. These are informations that only we can have. Lastly, connection, because politics is about who you connect to: lobbyists, donator, powerful people who can determine who get to be the minister next time. Those are connections that we can begin to build once we are in power, and for that we need more numbers. We proudly propose.
Thank you for your speech. Deputy.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep.
Panel, wait, sorry. I need time myself. Panel, this debate isn't about whether or not the AAP wants to fight corruption or whether or not it does not, right? This debate is simply about the position we want to be in when we want to execute the AAP's policy. And that was something which was largely ignored by OO, right? Because they never really analyzed what the counterfactual would look like on their side, and how they will only stick to having one seat, how they will have no power, and how they will never be able to execute the policies that they want to talk about. I'd argue that that's something that they lose on from the very start. I'll be talking about two things in this debate. First, on how we best fight the BJP and how that is the greatest threat to the AAP's beliefs. And second of all, why you get access to more power and you get better reform and more policies on our side of the house, exactly what the AAP wants to do. The first thing I'd like to talk about, though, is on their idea, right? Because the moment on your side of the house, when your counterfactual is like community, grassroots movements, I just like to note that that's non-exclusive, right? On our side of the house, presumably, the AAP would still be involved in localized discussions and talk to people on the ground, and they're able to persuade them, right? So that's not something which diminishes as soon as you bond with the other party, right? So that was something which was largely ignored by their side of the house. But now let's talk about what they want to talk about, right? Because first, I'm going to note why we better fight the BJP. The first thing I'd like to note is that we're better able to renew the image of the INC because you have a better branding, right? Because on our side of the house, the members of the AAP are likely the ones who are going to be put on display, because they're the ones who are traditionally good people. They're the ones who traditionally have a good background, and they're the ones who have been involved in localized discussions. So when the INC enters into a coalition with the AAP, they're likely to put AAP members as the display, and they're likely to put AAP members as the ones who are talking to members of the community. That is how you renew the image of the INC, by showing that by that a party which has historically had a good background backs and support the INC, when people trust in their leaders and they see that the AAP supports the INC, that is the moment when these people would actually support the INC as well. We're better able to renew their image on our side of the house. But second of all, I'd just like to note that media coverage is going to be far better on our side of the house, right? Because they will likely cover political events like mergers and coalitions, which signal a change in the tides of political events, right? That is the moment where you have more coverage on things like social media that I want to talk about on our side of the house, the moment you enter a coalition, compared to on their side when you're a single party and you're not really getting much coverage, right? Because you don't have that much seats, you're not a major power. But thirdly, I'd like to note that if you want to talk about localized grassroots discussions, that's comparatively better on our side of the house the moment you get more funds from things like the INC. Now, OO wants to tell us that the INC won't fund this because they're elites. Here's the problem. The INC are elites, so they will not want to take part in the localized discussions themselves, but they do have an interest in maintaining power and maintaining more money, and that is why they're fine with giving their money to the AAP to like hold their discussions and localize grassroots discussions without doing so themselves, right? So that was something which was never analyzed by their side of the house. Just because they are a part of the aristocratic elite does not mean that they aren't like willing to like spend some money on getting the AAP to have more discussions. So if you want to talk about like community engagement, I just have to note that the comparative is far better on our side of the house the moment you have a larger party backing you. But thirdly, they told us that you ruined the image of the AAP, right? I just like to note that this is not really nuanced, right? Because on our side of the house, we're able to change the image of the INC. Because exactly when we hold grassroots discussions with these people, when the leader of a party calls you and reassures you that they will change the INC because of your respect and your past trust in that leader, that makes you want to trust them now and makes you want to trust that they can change the INC, right? Because the comparative on their side of the house is that you are never able to have that kind of image that they want to talk about, right? On our side, the moment you can look at the past track record of the AAP, look at how good they are in the past, and look at what they've done for their community, the moment they tell you that they're going to support a party and change that, I'd argue that the psychology of their support base would be to simply follow them and to give them a chance to execute that policy, right? So I really don't think they're just going to ruin the image of the AAP. They can't simply assert that. But second of all, I'd like to note what is the psychology of their voters, right? And the people on the ground. Because their portrayal that we're going to show is that they are the lesser of two evils. Sure, the INC is corrupt and they are engaged in things like nepotism, and we will stand against that and we will like try to solve that. But the comparative is against the BJP, a nationalistic party that goes around harming minorities, right? People in Kashmir and people who are Muslims. And they want to say that this isn't really important, but it is, right? Because that's diametrically opposed to what the AAP stand for. The AAP stands for community building and empowering people on the ground, right? So it is diametrically opposed. This is something which AAP voters actually care about. OO can't simply say, that's not really what they care about, right? So on the comparative, we're better able to fight the BJP, and I think we've recognized that more clearly than their side of the house. They never really proved any counterfactual. But second of all, let's talk about accessing more power and getting more reform and policies. Now, the first thing we told you was on how you get how the balance of power in the status quo is extremely close, and how the AAP is a turning factor in those discussions, right? That was something which is largely ignored by their side of the house, and importantly, this necessarily means that the INC will be able to like close the gap between the BJP and become a much more significant voice in Congress. What were the benefits that we told you? First, we told you that you get more connections once you're in politics, right? The moment you're in Congress, the moment you have people within the parliament working together on a bill, that is the moment where you build relationships with other Congress men and women. That is the moment you have connections with people from the BJP, funders, donators. That was something which was largely ignored by their side of the house. Why is this crucially important in this debate? Because the reason why the AAP isn't able to grow is because it has a lack of funds. The reason why it can't expand within the status quo, no thank you, is because they don't have the funding to go around all these people, because they don't have recognition, and because they don't have enough famous people within their party. That is the moment we're able to get those connections on our side of the house. The moments once you're in Congress, you're able to work with other people and make connections. But second of all, we told you on how you can propose bills. And sure, we might not be the largest party. We may not be able to pass all those bills. We concede that, right? But if your bills are reasonable enough and they do benefit like all parties involved, that is the moment you get support from other parties. And crucially, then you get more like attention and more recognition from India as a whole, right? That is the moment people look to you as a person who can execute something, as the person who authored a bill. But thirdly, we tell you that you can scrutinize card governments and informations. And this is something which is largely ignored by their side of the house. Because if you want to talk about fighting corruption, it's the better way to do that from the outside, where you have no power, where you can simply talk to people on the ground, but you can't really do anything about it? Or is it better to do that once you're in Congress? We gave you 3 structural reasons as to why it's better once you're in Congress. First, we tell you that you can talk to people within parliament, you can look at the enemies of corruptors and talk to them and like get inside information, right? And you can use that against the people who corrupt. But second of all, we tell you that you're able to review documents which are given to congressional committees. This was something which was a nuance that they never really engaged with. But thirdly, we tell you that you can take part in closed-door congressional hearings, which is where most of the nepotism and most of the corruption actually exists. That is the reason why we're better able to fight against corruption, and we're better able to scrutinize the current government. Comparatively, on their side of the house, if you're simply on the outside, sure, you can look at what the media tells you, and you can go and tell people on the ground about it, but you're never able to get real change the moment you're on the outside. I'm incredibly proud to propose.
Thanks, Diallo.
With AIB, the only alternative that individuals in India who are sick and tired of corruption and nepotism can turn to, I think it's incredibly detrimental for them to remove such an alternative when the AIIB basically joins the INC to become an even more corrupt INC, right? So let us examine AAB's interest in this debate, because I think that is what basically is the crux of debate, right? And to do that, we need to see the trajectory of the AIIB. Note that the AIIB currently has a stronghold in Delhi, and it's increasingly being popular with urban voters. That means young millennials, people who are all the more likely to vote because they buy less into things like the Hindu nationalism, and they are more open to, like liberal conversations about how the state should be progressing in today's era, right? So they have these voters on their side of the house. And the second thing is also the increasingly number of people who are disillusioned with the INC that failed to live up to its original conception of swaraj, right? This means that a large number of INC voters will likely turn to the AAB as alternatives in the long run. And with that we say, right, with AAB becoming independent and going forth its independent campaigns, we think it's all the more likely that AAB would soon emerge victorious in terms of funding, in terms of connections, in terms of seats won in local elections, in order to contest the BJP in the long run, right? So let's talk about like the mechanisms, because they talk about how, like AAB is impossible to win due to like a lot of structural impediments in their place, right? One thing is about like fundings, right? We think that in order for AAB to stay true to its values and not turn out like the INC, the only way they can do this is to play outside the system. What does we mean? That means go with the mechanism brought up by my speaker. That means we campaign independently to local individuals, and we crowdfund in order to get ourselves into parliament, right? And we think that that's the only way we can maintain the purity of our message and not capitalize on existing resources by the INC that will be very eager to actually co-opt us, right? And so this is how the whole interest, right? They got the whole power dynamics wrong, because basically they say that leaders in AAB will be able to, change the perception of individuals in INC, right? And we think that this is fundamentally harmful, because if they're arguing against a state, if they're arguing against BJP and arguing against corruption and nepotism, we think that the only ideal candidate that can do that are individuals who are actually able to do that, right? By being with the INC, you're basically complicit in the things that Modi do, just that it's not the BJP party, right? So we don't really see how they can enact any visible change on their side of the house, right? Yeah, before I go, is that OG? Yeah. Hello, OG?
So if your grassroots movement is that effective, why is it that we only get 2.1% in the last election?
Right, because notice of all the contextualization I brought with you earlier that AAB is still a fairly new party, and it's precisely when you are new that you need to build trust amongst your voters. We think it's actually premature, right, for AAB to cut its upward trajectory and suddenly co-op with the INC for some short-term gain, which, let's face it, INC isn't going to be the BJP. But if AAB is able to actually, is able to actually stand independently on its own, it's first able to co-op people who would vote normally for INC by increasingly being disillusioned with the INC. And if AAP can maintain a better representation of the swaraj mechanism, which INC has failed to, we think that increasingly most people in India who do not vote for the BJP, who do not believe in Hindu nationalism or the BJP, would then go over to the ANC, right? So we see that because of the fact that ANC is still fairly new, we think that it should actually establish its credibility and trust amongst voters by playing outside the system and actively, condemning and not falling prey into the INC's rhetoric, rhetoric, right? And we see that that's the only way to go, right? So of all these things, right, it's really likely that if the ANC actually do join with the INC, it's likely that they're unable to push forth their cause because they're more likely going to be co-opted into a government that just wants to maintain power, a government that wants to silence them because they view them as a very credible threat in the future, right? Given their stronghold on Delhi and why younger voters will vote for them. Let me tell you why it's now increasingly important for AAC to actually prioritize what it currently has now. Because no, it currently has Delhi. And why is Delhi extremely important? Because if it goes over to the side of INC, notice the area that INC never won, it's likely that they will then lose Delhi. And why is it extremely detrimental if they lose Delhi? Because Delhi, I think, has the ability to shape narratives. Note that Delhi is the capital of India, right? This means that a lot of countries overseas will look to Delhi and see it as a place where a lot of legislative reforms are happening. And we think that this is especially beneficial for the AAC, such a new party, to actually capitalize on the spotlight, capitalize on so many political institutions that are happening in Delhi in order to campaign for their change, right? In order to show forth the message of what India actually is, right? And we think that it's especially important, especially in today's in today's Indian society that's extremely corrupt, right? That the ANC has to stand up and say that I'm directly fighting against what BJP stand for, and not cower behind some like hypocritical party that can only provide them with the resources, but it's actually not interested and invested in taking out like whatever that's the problem, right? So I think the only way for our AAC to go now is to actually not look into the long term, right? Note that you can't possibly win BJP now due to the kind of personality that Modi has, and so all you can do now is to actually win in the local elections by actually going to grassroots, going through campaigns and doing that, right? And we think that it's all the more beneficial on our side because it's likely that if you do it through the INC, individuals are already disillusioned with the party, and that your campaign and that your specific form of campaigning will not work, right? We think that it will only work specifically with such a new party like AAC, who has established itself as independent from any other political party. And I think this independence showcases a sense of commitment, that it refuses to play within the system, that it refuses to play into a system which tries to co-opt it, right, and tries to make it more slightly moderate or silent or more complicit in their corruptive mechanisms, right? And I think that is extremely important. So for all that reasons, I'm very proud to propose.
Thank you for your speech. I'd like to welcome the Gov member.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Go. Panel, understand that we are debating whether or not it is in the strategic interest of Aam Aadmi Party for the general election, right? It is important to set context in that regard. The objective over here is to have it as, say, gaining party leadership in the general elections is ambitious and long term. But what we're looking at here is the ability to create a significant dent that the stronghold have or that BJP has in the center, right? It is the ability to be perceived as a legitimate opposition who has a significant chance of standing up to BJP in the center, right? When opening opposition, comes up here and talks about how AAP can stand by itself without compromising principles and utilizing crowdfunding and capitalizing on, say, how Delhi works. First of all, the opposition seems to misunderstand how coalitions work, right? Aam Aadmi Party standing alone is simply unfeasible because it does not have the resources to appeal to voters across the country. And in a first past the post system, it's about the person who wins the seat and not who has the most number of votes, right? Understand that in a country such as India with with multiple states with varying languages and different cultures across the country, a party needs to put in significant effort to appealing to each and every state about appealing to their local cultures and appealing to and trying to overcome these linguistic differences in order to gain significant traction, right? Understand that despite the fact that Aam Aadmi Party did win in Delhi two times in a row, it still has no independence with regard to its party, right? It's still perceived as a union territory without any real autonomy, and it needs to push with significant support in order to gain a foothold in the center, right? Now, first of all, what is the political context in India right now? Understand that there is a large-scale political shift against BJP, to the extent of BJP losing the Nagpur constituency, which is significant because that's the birthplace of RSS. BJP losing 2 consecutive elections in Delhi, which is perceived as a central stronghold, and a shift of there's a trend shifting from BJP's controlling states to states where a non-BJP government is being elected, right? However, the unique extension that we bring to you is how an individual voter perceives this, right? There is still a disjunction between how there's a disjunction between how central voting works and state level voting works, right? There is a disjunction between how an average voter wants to vote for BJP in the state level, whereas in the central level they want to vote for their own central government, right? These voters do not want later, sir. These voters do not want BJP as a central government. Now, the fact still remains that despite all the anti-BJP state level rhetoric, the rhetoric towards the center is overwhelmingly pro-Modi. Why is this the case? This is the case largely because, this can be seen in the 2019 elections, where BJP won to the extent of Congress not being able to form a proper opposition by not winning enough seats. Now, for the average voter who voted for BJP, there's not only support for BJP, but also the perception that there is no viable alternative, right? The most viable alternative over here is Congress, and they're disinclined to vote for Congress simply because of the nepotism and the perception of inefficiency within Congress, and the fact that they are believed to be rigid, where there's no leeway for younger leaders. For example, Sachin Pilot in Rajasthan was sidelined in favor of an older leader, Ashok Gehlot, and the and the party leaders, that is the Gandhi family, where Rahul Gandhi is perceived as incompetent and is constantly ridiculed, and Sonia Gandhi is perceived as an outsider. So the public perception towards Congress is largely poor, right? But why Congress despite its present perceptions? First, the fact that they have ideological common ground with Aam Aadmi Party, which BJP doesn't have, right? BJP wants to focus on the centralization of power and take away power from the states. In contrast to this, Congress pushes for some degree of decentralization. They have a lot of efficiency from many local leaders, and despite the corruption and the nepotism, Congress still has significant
Before 6,
support.
please.
Yes.
Given the BJP had lost to regional non-BJP governments and not the Indian National Congress in individual states, how is it strategic for the AAP to leave regional principles and join Indian National Congress?
Yes. Okay. So understand that despite all this corruption and nepotism, the reason why Congress is perceived as a legitimate national party or a competitor to BJP is its legacy and its efficiency in state level governments. Right? The ideological common ground that AAP has comes to the extent of there being federal and community approach. Right? Now, ultimately over here, voters would want to vote for Congress because Congress is willing to make change and shift away from the Gandhi leadership, and the perception of change that Congress is willing to do by coaliting with Aam Aadmi Party in the first place is something that will change their perception, right? But also understand that Aam Aadmi Party is a party that has continuously produced excellent results in the form of infrastructure, education, and access to medical infrastructure. But they cannot win this alone. For example, in Bangalore in 2014, Aam Aadmi Party stood by itself and did not succeed, and they no longer are present in Karnataka. They need support through INC by access to Congress-dominated states, right? And this is particularly relevant in the present context because despite BJP's overwhelming victory in 2019, they saw certain unprecedented things in the form of mass public criticism against their policy actions and the inefficiency of handling the present pandemic. And this is the most opportune moment for BJP for Aam Aadmi Party to capitalize on and gain traction. And with that, I'm proud to propose.
Thanks for that speech. Just like to remind everyone to please be courteous with regards to POI manner and to make sure you're not distracting speakers or judges either through doing anything that's particularly visually distracting or through interrupting. You can best is just have a discrete signal of a POI or to just kind of quietly ask the POI, not to say it too loudly. All good. We'll move on to opposition member. Thanks.
Right. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So I think the central question of this debate is how the AAP gets what it wants and gets power within India today. I want to note that opening government's entire case is actually really just dependent on the simple premise that joining the INC will allow them to get power. And in fact, by Vincentia starting by framing that they have to get power immediately because the longer the BJP is in power, the harder it is, they raise their burden to proving that joining with the INC will mean that in the immediate term, they are able to get power. The problem is that when they said that when the premise of this was that that the INC would let the AAP candidates run instead of their candidates, it just didn't make sense. Because the point is that, as the info site suggests, INC is very much about the cult around the Gandhi family, and effectively is a political dynasty within that particular political party. And that means that it's uniquely unlikely that they're going to cede power, especially if it's likely that INC can only win so many seats. And the reality is the INC does not have a significant hold in Delhi, nor does the AAP have a lot of seats in the national houses. I'm sorry, I can't really pronounce that. I don't want to butcher it. Within Delhi. That means that on both sides of the house, it is true that they're not going to win a significant number of national level seats. It is unlikely that they are going to allow these seats to go to the AAP, which means that the deputies pulling back of the PM argument to say that we just need one fellow in there so we can get connections just doesn't actually make sense. There are two important reasons we are going to suggest that the AAP will better get what it wants on our side. And these are our extensions. The first is that waiting is a better option to get support. The second is that even if you don't ever wait for the right time to go national, there are other ways for you to advance. I think within this, I will deal naturally with both opening and closing government. First, on why waiting is a better option to get support. The argument that you heard from closing government is that voters want to vote for Congress. I know it's a bit dangerous for me to be the one to say that I don't think they are accurate about the way India works, but the reality is I don't think this is necessarily true for two reasons. First, Congress is under a lot of shit right now. The fact that it is painted as against Hindu, but was characterized as being a supporter of Muslims if within a time of more Hindu nationalism than ever. The fact that the corruption allegations that surround Congress, and the allegation that Rahul Gandhi is not even an Indian-born citizen that was spread by the BJP and gained significant fanfare in the lead up to elections, means that Congress is significantly, it's just very unpopular at the moment. At best, even if Congress has some degree of support in the South, the reality is that many BJP-linked parties won in the South, which is why the 31% statistic that Vincentius gave you is not actually very accurate. But even if this is true, then this knifes opening government, because opening government's premise was that the INC is not that popular. That's why they will take a step back and allow the AAP to have a lot of resource of relevance in the new coalition. If it's true that the votes are based on Congress, then it is more likely that in closing, they cannot argue that the AAP will get its legislative platform out. If that means they have to fight with Congress's platform, and Congress knows that it is the one with the degree of national outreach that is able to create a significant, that is able to even give AAP the platform to get onto the national scene. So only one of those can be true. Only one of the two gov teams can advance. Here is why waiting is a better option. There are two reasons. The first is that the specific measures that AAP stand for don't work in conjunction with the INC. Opening opposition just said, association to corruption is bad for reputation. Opening gov says corruption is endemic within India anyway, so there's no unique difference. Here's what's unique from closing opposition. I think the reality is corruption and any link to corruption specifically kills the way in which AAP uniquely wants to brand itself. Narratives of decentralization is difficult to exist in a world where you are linked to corruption, because decentralization makes corruption even harder to track. Community building specifically requires intimate trust between you and that particular candidate, and that doesn't work the moment there is any doubt to that individual's character. So the specific platform of the AAP does not work with INC, which makes it different from openings and broad analysis on just any link to corruption is bad for any politician. But second, now is a uniquely bad time, and the reason for and the framing for this is twofold. The first is Modi's cult of personality, by which everyone agrees the BJP stays in power, will pass over time. But the problem is that in the now and the near future, the reality is that one, there's going to be a lot of Citizenship Amendment Act-based baiting. There's going to be the fact that there's COVID and the likely economic slowdown for India means that Modi is more likely to use his power to crack down even more on any degree of opposition within the short term in the next couple of years. The problem with that is that means that the AAP allying with the INC indicates that they have dreams of going national at a point where where Delhi is a COVID hotspot, which means that local governments come under the spotlight for the way they manage it within that city, and also where AAP has not had time to gain a significant power and a significant track record of success within Delhi. That makes them at increased risk of BJP attack. A BJP attack for the stance against the Citizenship Amendment Act, and now their links to discredited Rahul Gandhi. All of the state machinery of India's press that is more and more under the control of BJP is likely to be unleashed onto the AAP in the short term, at a point where COVID allows Modi to say that the country needs to bend around him because he is a strong leader that is able to create success for India. The comparative on that side is that you wait for Modi to go. You wait for people to get tired of the economic slowdown, and the CAA passes so that the urgency of Hindutva and Muslim baiting decreases. That is when you see a slow decrease in BJP support. This is also time that AAP is able to use its community engagement to build up Delhi. Delhi is always going to economically prosper in the long term because of the concentration of technological companies within Delhi. And then as it strengthens, you are better able to promise this to the rest of the country. You can use your track record as success within itself. You don't need the INC machinery. They say you'll never have enough reach. One, there's actually increased social media penetration in India. India is the cheapest place in the world to get a smartphone and the cheapest place in the world to get a data plan. But secondly, migrants from south to north mean that there is a natural spread of your message downwards into the south, out of order, Vincentius, which means that you are better able to spread the messaging of what you've done well in Delhi to the rest of the country. You don't even need to go national immediately. But second, even if you don't ever get the right time, you can advance in other ways. If you look specifically at the mechanisms that the AAP wants, things like self-governance and community are ultimately about localized governance that they want. I agree, they would ideally want this to exist across the country. But the reality is that if you think about the ethos behind that, it is suggesting that the best way that a country, a given region can govern itself is to have less interference from federal government. The point is, if it is true that neither side are likely to dislodge the BJP immediately, the less you challenge the BJP, the more you are able to negotiate with them as the state leader of Delhi, which is the core of the Indian economy. You use that to negotiate with the BJP and then gain some degree of benefit, because the BJP cannot succeed without some degree of pliance and cooperation from the local state government of Delhi. That is incredibly important to allowing the AAP to get a bit more freedom within Delhi, a bit more ability to create the kind of community leadership that it thinks is the way forward for India. And doing this on a small microcosm in Delhi successfully is already a success for the AAP's ethos of leadership and politics. We are very happy to propose.
Thanks for that, GovWhip.
Hi, can all of you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'll just. Okay, I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, over the course of my speech, I'll be focusing on 2 critical questions. Right? First, why is this particular move in the interest of Aam Aadmi Party? And second, and more important question of how does this actually play out in the next general election and in the future? What are the more likely reasons that we give for which we think it's better for the Aam Aadmi Party? But a couple of things which I want to point out from the opposition bench, right? The reasons that they give of why Aam Aadmi Party can do well on its own is just that it's popular in Delhi and they're doing efficiently, which means that they can somehow garner significant support across 540 seats across 28 states to be able to cause some kind of dent over a longer period of time. Right? We think this is false for a bunch of reasons, and we gave those reasons in our members' speech. Right? We told you, for example, how the way in which the first past the post system would work is that you would be standing, like if Aam Aadmi Party stands in the election next time in a bunch of these constituencies, it'd be standing against the Congress, against the BJP, against the local parties as well. So it's not just fighting a battle against BJP to gain popularity, right? It's also fighting a battle against the existing local parties that's there in those different states. That is there in those different states, and it was in this context that we told you that it's important to tie up with Congress, which has significant presence in a bunch of states, and they're misrepresenting this argument that, oh, just because there's a shift in against BJP means suddenly everyone's going to vote for BJP or everyone's going to vote for Aam Aadmi Party as long as they ask for votes. Right? That's not how it's going to work. What we told you is unique to this particular situation is the fact that at this moment Aam Aadmi Party can now rely on the access that Congress gives to a bunch of states, right? What does this access look like? This is something that's crucial, right? It's not just in terms of like when opening government says resources. What do these resources actually look like? It's not just funds. It's also a lot of grassroots workers who can go to different, who can go to homes, knock on the doors, and tell what you can do, right? Why is this an important fact in this debate, and why is this an important interest in this debate? Because what the comparative is what the BJP relies on. It relies on the RSS machinery, which is not just their own political party workers. They have an entire organization of workers on the basis of which they're able to garner support on the ground, right? Which is why over a longer period of time, no matter how powerful Aam Aadmi Party might become on its own, it will never be able to match up to the significant amount of workers on the ground that BJP has, or that for example even Congress Party has, because of its long 60-year legacy that it has in a bunch of these states. That's the kind of access that Aam Aadmi Party really requires, and that's the kind of access which will gain it some kind of foothold, which will, for the basis of which it is going to get foothold in the coming elections. Before that, I'm going to take
We gather support across socio-linguistic diversity through local community leaders from the region itself, which is completely in line with the Aam Aadmi Party ideology, and it has done and won the Lok Sabha seats from Punjab through this measure.
Oh, okay. Look, this is a lie, right? In 2014, when Aam Aadmi Party really had like some presence of leaders across states, they lost a lot of those seats. After that, they reduced the presence because they didn't have enough money to support that. Right? People lost trust in the Aam Aadmi Party to that extent. The only place where Aam Aadmi Party is significantly doing well is in Delhi, right? That's a local that's a local, a small federal, it's a capital territory, and they're doing well there. That's great for them. But what they need is presence across states, not just a few states like Punjab or Haryana, where we think, yes, that's true that they have presence there, but they need a lot more across states to win those, to win the seats, or to have the potential to create dents on the voting share as well. No, I won't be taking any more POI. But the second thing which we told you is a lot more important for Aam Aadmi Party's interest is how there is an ideological similarity to the extent of a federal nature that INC has, which the BJP doesn't, right? When closing opposition tells that, look, they have to just wait for BJP to give them some more freedom and they can negotiate, right? Aam Aadmi Party tried. It tried for the last 6 years to get BJP to recognize that Delhi is a state, to give them the law and order powers of the state, right? They didn't. It failed miserably because BJP is focused on centralization of power across the parties that currently exist. It's only the INC which has a federal nature, federal character to their policies. Right? The reason for this is because historically a lot of the leaders from INC have come from different states. A lot of their popularity comes from these states, in Rajasthan, in Madhya Pradesh, in Karnataka as well, where right now there might have been opposition, but just the previous term they were in power. Right? This is what is crucial, because what this means is it aligns with Aam Aadmi Party goals of giving self-governance, giving governance as an important criteria in the way they approach the elections themselves. So that's a policy platform that they can then rely on. But let's look at how this actually plays out in the world, because we think it's really unfair for closing opposition to just talk about how people are suddenly going to vote for Aam Aadmi Party. We told you that one of the reasons why the Indian voter votes for BJP, sure, is because of cult of personality, but also because of lack of any significant alternatives, right? A lot of people across states believe that the Aam Aadmi Party could have been an alternative, but they think they're too small. They think that they're very limited. Therefore, they will never be able to beat BJP on national level, so they don't vote for Aam Aadmi Party. Then when they look at Congress, they think that because Congress has never been willing to change from the past 60 years, they're not going to vote for Congress. Therefore, inevitably, they have to vote for BJP, even if there might be some doubt in their heads that they maybe do not want to. The reason why this analysis, this specific argument about the voters is important is because what the coalition between Aam Aadmi Party and Congress does is not just like reduce the burden, shed away the image of Congress from one of rigidity to one of being slightly clean or some slightly more accepting of change. It also allows for Aam Aadmi Party to gain that national presence, right? What this means is, for example, voters can now believe that Aam Aadmi Party is big enough in the next election, which is like 5 years down the line, big enough to tackle the BJP, big enough to be able to tackle, to be able to form a government in the center, right? Which means that there is significant potential, greater potential for Aam Aadmi Party to convince voters to vote for them in the next election, as opposed to what the alternative, what the comparative is, right? Which is that the Aam Aadmi Party is alone fighting constituencies against the BJP, against the INC, and voters know that there is a legacy that exists of 60 years, that INC is big enough, but there is some problem. But when they see that both of them have joined together, they're more likely to change their minds to vote. And we think that that potential to convince voters is an extremely important benefit that stands only when they're able to tie up with a historic party that has significant presence. For all of these reasons, we're extremely proud to propose.
Thanks for that. And to conclude the debate, Otwip.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Okay, just a moment. Okay, starting. On the matter of the AAP's current interests and priorities, I think there are two important things to note in this debate. Number one, the BJP's authoritative power and influence in India poses an inherent problem for the AAP in its efforts to accumulate power. And number two, that the notion of the swaraj is directly contradicted by the act of joining in a coalition with the INC. Now, the context important for this debate is obviously that the AAP is gradually gaining influence within Delhi, as well as localized regions of India, whilst the BJP continues to exercise greater authoritative influences in India, much of which, however, which means that comparatively, the AAP gains power in a decentralized manner, which is credited again to the notion of swaraj, which differs from the current way the administration exercises sovereignty and control. Given this situation, as CEO, we want to emphasize that the precise reason the precise reason by which we are able to add on to OO is because OO doesn't really tell you why the ideals and values crucial to the AAP, this notion of swaraj, is connected to their ability to gain power locally, and why there's therefore a fundamental contradiction in the act of joining in a coalition with the INC. They talk about community engagement and going towards pragmatism and how these collide with the increasingly questionable policies and reputation of the INC due to disillusionment, but they never really characterize specifically where this notion of swaraj connects to the danger that comes to the AAP in joining the INC. Given this, Sean has uniquely brought to you two unique cases. Firstly, that the AAP must gain power by securing its local and regional influences from the bottom up, and secondly, that they must protect their power by avoiding directly clashing with the BJP. All rebuttals will be integrated as I defend these premises. So our first case, right, we believe that the AAP can secure better outcomes and growth for itself by focusing on gaining power locally through federal government, and this is where we add on to O's lacking explanation about why and how the principles of the AAP are not aligned with those of the INC. The notion of swaraj is based on the idea of decentralized models, right? And we think that other than just going against the idea that if the INC has continued corruption scandals, this doesn't allow for the AAP to directly deal with such centralized matters of internal control through this decentralized model. We think that, in other words, by aligning itself with the INC, the AAP, we think that the AAP is not able to uphold its general principle of community engagement and local and regional manners in establishing better influence over people, better influence that helps people on the ground. OG here tells you that better reforms and policies happens on their side because the AAP can suggestively still do grassroots things within the INC, but with better branding. But because the INC in itself is not a group that allows for the same grassroots efforts of the AAP to exist, because it is an inherently top-down move, going national, aligning itself with the INC, we think that the idea of grassroots movements being better on their side is not an argument that they can take away. And we think that the idea of fighting corruption better in INC, whereas on the ground outside without the help of the INC, we don't think this is a premise that stands, because how are you supposed to fight corruption within a party that you are directly receiving resources and funds from, where you have already aligned yourself in order to gain better position, strategic power within the country? I'll take a POI from OG here.
The Democrat National Convention is a party that is corrupt and also anti-grassroots. Bernie Sanders is part of the Democrat Party, but he can maintain his grassroots activism and he can also fight against corruption. Why can't the same be done by AAP?
I don't think the context of Indian politics is inherently the same as the context of American politics, wherein people like Bernie Sanders obviously represent a lot of greater radical socialist ideals. And we think in this case, the better priority of the AAP is in this case to secure grassroots movement locally, right? Through the regions of India, wherein they already have shown to be, engage with the community on the ground. And we think in this case that the idea of grassroots movement just fundamentally cannot be secured in the side of government, as far as the ideal of decentralized models still stands as an inherent principle of the AAP. Now, CJ here says that AAP can rely on the access and resources that the INC provides it, which is beneficial for it. However, note that again, in the current context, as the AAP garners support in a decentralized manner across India, it is more in line with the AAP's principles of decentralization and swaraj and community engagement for the AAP to use social media and the migrants coming back and forth from Delhi to naturally spread the notion of the AAP success across the country. Now, this brings us to our second case that Sean has told you about how joining in a coalition with the INC is not an effective way for the AAP to counter and deal with the BJP. Rather, they should seek to magnify their power by gaining power gradually in Delhi without directly challenging the BJP, which would only in fact counterproductively bring the AAP under fire. This case directly responds to OG's case about fighting the BJP. As the current context shows, the AAP is currently amassing influence again in Delhi, and it is not in their interest to contest with BJP on the national level. The comparative here is that in Gov's world, as soon as the AAP joins itself with the INC, this directly implies the AAP this directly implies that the AAP is challenging the BJP's legitimacy. This counterproductive outcome, the counterproductive outcome is that the BJP, with all its funds and resources, will in turn go on to delegitimize the AAP in the media nationwide and portray it as an insignificant, radical, unrepresented political force. As Sean tells you, this means that they are showing themselves, the AAP is showing themselves to be allied with the INC, and is gaining a national presence before the end of the BJP regime, which means that you allow the BJP to take control of the AAP's characterization, which means that the BJP gets to dominate the narrative by which the AAP is perceived by society, which is exactly the opposite of what we want. And so what you get inside government's world is, unfortunately, a scenario where the AAP loses its image and reputability and its ability to reach out and access the very people on the ground that they are originally trying to help, let alone challenge the BJP in any significant manner. And so in opposition's world, in our side, we think that the AAP should maintain and nurture its current level of that the BJP should that the AAP should maintain and nurture its current level of support at local levels and win within local regions separately. They should use their local elections to challenge the BJP by way of negotiating with them, because as Sean has told you, in terms of federal government and federal elections, the ruling party of the BJP recognizes a need to work with federal and local counterparts in order to create community leadership. Community leadership can in fact exist on a local level that benefits people on the ground without having to take things nationally and ally with the INC, which again, as we mentioned before in our first case, it just doesn't fundamentally just doesn't have principles that align with that of the AAP, mostly in terms of swaraj, right? So hence, if the AAP wishes to rise in power in any sustainable or gradual way, if they wish to truly withstand the Modi regime, they must approach the power play between the INC and the BJP with great caution, strategically, and not directly challenge the BJP by allying themselves with the INC, which would put them under direct national scrutiny thanks to the already existing powers of the BJP. And so we think in this case, we additionally beat OO's case because they don't show an alternative route to how the AAP can rise to power sustainably and gradually without avoiding the backfire from both national presences and the BJP, and so side with closing up.
Thanks everyone for that debate.